He wrote the number on the back of an envelope, not because he did not have a calculator, because the envelope was right there beside his coffee, at the kitchen table in his place in Ringwood. $100,000. That was the number he had in his head. That was what he thought a comfortable retirement looked like. Enough to cover the bills, a holiday once a year, dinner out on Fridays, and not having to check his bank balance before going to Bunnings. $100,000 a year. The question was simple, the answer was not. How much super do you actually need to make that number work? And why does every article he reads seem to give a different figure? If you have ever typed that question into Google and come away more confused than when you started, stay with me, because today I am going to walk through the real maths, step by step, using current Australian super and pension rules. And I will show you why the number that comes out at the end surprises most people. Let me start with a number you have probably seen in the newspapers, $2 million, sometimes 2.5. That is the figure that gets quoted when people ask how much super you need for a comfortable retirement. And it comes from a simple rule, the 4% rule. The idea is this: if you withdraw 4% of your super each year, your money should last roughly 30 years. 4% of $2.5 million is $100,000. There is your headline. But here is the problem. That calculation assumes you are funding the entire $100,000 from super alone. It assumes the age pension does not exist. And for most Australians, that assumption is wrong. The age pension, under current rates, pays a maximum of about $31,200 a year for a single person and about $47,000 for a couple combined. That is real money. It arrives in your bank account every fortnight. And for many Australians, it forms the foundation of their retirement income, with super filling the gap on top. So the real question is not, how much super do I need for $100,000? The real question is, how much of that $100,000 does my super need to provide, and how much does the pension cover? And this is where it gets genuinely interesting, and where most people have never had it explained clearly. The pension is not a fixed amount that you either get or you do not. It is means tested. The more assets you have, including your super, the less pension you receive. And once your assets pass a certain cutoff, the pension disappears entirely.
This scenario provides a sustainable income stream based on the projections.
And this figure here, does that include the franking credits?
Yes, it does. This structure provides the best balance of growth and minimized risk, right here.
Does that account for the recent volatility?
Yes, it does.
$733,500 in countable assets. So if your super balance is above that figure, you receive no pension at all. You are funding the full $100,000 from super. At a 5% drawdown rate, which is the minimum required between 65 and 74, you would need $2 million to generate $100,000 a year. At 4%, $2.5 million. But what about a couple? And this is where the picture changes dramatically. A couple who own their home can have countable assets up to about $1,100,000 before the pension disappears completely. And the combined full pension, about $47,000 a year, covers nearly half the target. The gap they need to fill from super is roughly $53,000. At 5% drawdown, that requires about $1,060,000. At 4%, about $1,325,000. That is a very different number from $2.5 million. And it is the number the newspapers almost never mention. Now, here is where most explanations stop. But there is a second layer to this that changes everything.
The colour of the water
and
today.
most people have never heard it.
It really is breathtaking.
I'm so glad we came out this afternoon. It tapers. For every $1,000 in assets above the lower threshold, your pension reduces by $3 per fortnight. So there is a sliding scale, a range, where you receive a part pension that supplements your super income. Understanding where you sit on that scale is one of the most important calculations in retirement planning. That interaction between your super and your pension entitlement is something we have covered in detail on this channel. And when you see the two numbers modelled side by side, the picture becomes much clearer than either number alone. Let me give you a real scenario, because this is where the maths becomes personal. A couple, both 68, living in their own home in Castle Hill, Sydney. They have $700,000 in combined super and $40,000 in a savings account. Total countable assets, $740,000. Under the assets test for a homeowner couple, the full pension threshold is about $499,000. They are over by 241,000. At the taper rate of $3 per fortnight per thousand, their pension reduces by about $723 per fortnight. The maximum couple pension is $1,810.40 per fortnight, so they receive roughly $1,087 per fortnight. That is about $28,260 a year in pension. On top of that, they are drawing 5% from their $700,000 in super, $35,000 a year. Plus, a small amount of interest on the savings account. Their total retirement income, roughly $64,000 a year. That is well short of $100,000. To close the gap, they would need either more super, pushing towards
As you can see here, the portfolio is structured to provide a steady income stream throughout your retirement.
Yes, that makes sense. We appreciate the clarity.
And here is something most people do not realize. The target does not need to be the same every year. In the early years of retirement, 60 to 67, before the age pension kicks in, you are drawing entirely from super. That is the most expensive phase, but once the pension starts, your super takes on a supporting role. And as your super balance draws down over time, your pension actually increases because your assessed assets are falling. The system is designed this way. Super funds the early years. The pension grows into the later years. That is why the question, how much super do I need, does not have a single answer. It depends on when you retire, whether you own your home, whether you are single or part of a couple, and how quickly your super draws down. It is a framework, not a number. And there is another factor that most calculations ignore, the pensioner concession card. If you receive any amount of age pension, even a small part pension, you get the card. And the card gives you access to reduced PBS prescriptions, bulk billed GP visits where available, discounted council rates, state energy concessions, and cheaper public transport. The value of those concessions can add up to $2,000 or $3,000 a year. That is effectively invisible income. It does not show up in your bank account, but it reduces your expenses, which has the same effect. Now, let me bring this back to the question you came here for. How much do you actually need? Here is the honest framework, under current rules, using current figures. For a single homeowner targeting $100,000 a year, you likely need between 1.6 and 2 million in super. Because at that level, you are past the pension cutoff and funding the full amount yourself.
$12
if your target is closer to 70 or 80,000, the pension starts to contribute,
we'll be taking out a second
and the super
mortgage
requirement drops
soon.
significantly. We have broken down the $80,000 scenario in another video, and the difference between the two targets is larger than most people expect. For a couple targeting $100,000 combined, you need between $900,000 and $1.3 million in combined super, depending on your drawdown rate and how much part pension you receive. The couple scenario is significantly more achievable because the pension covers a larger share of the target. And I want to be clear about something. These figures use the 4 and 5% drawdown framework, which is designed to be sustainable over a 25 to 30-year retirement. If you draw faster, you need less upfront, but you risk running out. If you draw slower, you need more, but your money lasts longer. The right rate depends on your health, your age, your other income, and your tolerance for uncertainty. And if you're unsure, talk to a qualified, independent financial advisor, someone who charges a fee for advice, not a commission on a product. One more thing worth knowing, and it connects to everything we have covered today. The cost of living is rising. $100,000 today does not buy what it bought 5 years ago. Groceries are up. Insurance premiums are climbing every year. Electricity is higher than it has ever been. The pension is indexed. But has it kept pace with what retirees actually experience at the checkout and the letterbox? That gap between official inflation and the real cost of retirement is something we have unpacked step by step, because the numbers tell a story that is more confronting than the headlines suggest. So what we have covered today is this. The amount of super you need to retire on $100,000 a year depends entirely on how much age pension you are entitled to. And that depends on your assets, your structure, and whether you are single or a couple. The newspaper headline says 2 million. The real answer, for most couples, is closer to 1 million. And for singles, somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million. The pension is not a bonus. It is a structural part of the equation. But there is something else worth exploring, something that connects directly to what we have covered today. What if your super is not anywhere near 1 million? What if it is closer to 500,000, which is where the average Australian actually sits? Can you still retire? The answer is more nuanced than yes or no, and the pension plays an even larger role at that balance. That scenario is something we will cover in full, because for most Australians, it is the most relevant question of all. If this helped make sense of something
this structure provides the best balance of growth and minimized risk, right here.
Does that account for the recent volatility?
Sometimes all it takes is someone showing you the full picture, not just the super number, but the pension number beside it. And I'm curious, have you ever worked out what your retirement income would actually be, combining your super and the pension? Or is it still a number you have been avoiding? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your questions genuinely shape what I cover next.